How's it going, folks? Welcome back to another alternate history scenario. If you liked this video, be sure to leave a like afterward and share it, as well as give me your feedback in the comments. The focus of this video today is the country of Nigeria. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Miguel Oolong and Herbert Ramohopa for both suggesting this scenario. Now let's get into it. Nigeria, Africa's largest country by population, with nearly 1 in 6 Africans being a citizen of Nigeria. Nigeria, a nation with a long and proud history dating back millennia. Nigeria, a nation haunted by a history of political instability, civil unrest, and sectarian violence. Nigeria, a nation in the grip of poverty and corruption. Nigeria, a nation whose citizens have long yearned for freedom, peace, and prosperity. The Nigerian people have always been driven by an ambition to work towards a better life for themselves, their families, their communities, and their nation as a whole, but have long lacked a government that shared this sacred and virtuous dream. There are perhaps few nations with as much potential as Nigeria has, a potential that, since Nigeria gained independence, has been squandered throughout countless interethnic conflicts and political unrest, including numerous coups d'etats and, most importantly, the Nigerian Civil War of the late 1960s. Before we begin the alternate history scenario, we must understand why Nigeria has experienced all of this chaos. To do this, we must take a quick look at the history of Nigeria. For millennia, the land we now know as Nigeria was not united at all into any nation or state identifiable as a precursor to the modern Nigerian state, as may be possible with other African nations like Ethiopia. Instead, for millennia, the land that now forms Nigeria was home to numerous empires and states, including the Hausa kingdoms, Oyo Empire, Edo Kingdom, and Kingdom of Enri. In the modern day, the three main ethnic groups in Nigeria are the Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo. First contact between the peoples of the region we now call Nigeria and European colonial powers occurred in 1485, when the Portuguese arrived in what is today Nigeria and began a trading relationship with the southern kingdoms. The trading relationship's foundation was the Portuguese trading European goods and weapons in exchange for slaves from the southern kingdoms, which made these kingdoms very wealthy. Soon enough, the southern coastal cities of these pre-colonial kingdoms became integral ports to fuel the slave trade, as well as hubs for the spread of Christianity across what is today southern Nigeria. In 1804, in what is today northern Nigeria, the Hausa kingdoms of the Hausa ethnic group were conquered by the Sokoto Caliphate, an Islamic state created after the Fulani ethnic group defeated the Hausa kingdoms, unifying them under Fulani Islamic rule. The Sokoto Caliphate spearheaded efforts to convert all remaining non-Muslims in the north and enslaved anywhere from 1 to 2.5 million non-Muslims. In 1807, Britain abolished its slave trade and began naval patrols off the coast of West Africa to suppress the slave trade of its European rivals. Despite these efforts, the southern kingdoms of what is now Nigeria continued to participate in the slave trade due to its lucrative nature. Following a power struggle in the city-state of the Kingdom of Lagos regarding the line of succession between pro- and anti-slavery forces, Britain launched a military intervention in the small city-state, successfully installing the anti-slavery King Akitoye on the throne. In 1861, Akitoye's successor, under British pressure, signed a treaty making Lagos a British protectorate, signifying the start of British colonialism in Nigeria. Beginning in the 1870s, the Royal Niger Company, a British private trading company, began bringing the southern kingdoms of Nigeria into its sphere of influence by force. Although in the past, British settlement in Nigeria was extremely limited due to the presence of tropical diseases, with the advent of mass production of quinine, a cure for malaria, in the 1820s, Britain was now able to expand their colonization of various tropical locales, including what is today Nigeria. In 1896, British envoys were massacred after journeying to the Edo Kingdom against the wishes of the kingdom's leader, King Overamin. In 1897, in response to the massacre, Britain launched a punitive expedition against the Edo Kingdom, massacring towns and villages across the kingdom. The king's palace was looted and burned, and much of the capital city caught on fire. The Edo kingdom was formally annexed by Britain in the aftermath. Furthermore, this punitive invasion marked the beginning of the British military conquest of what is today Nigeria. Once the scramble for Africa, which was the colonization of the African continent by European powers in the late 1800s and early 1900s began, British colonization efforts kicked into high gear. In 1900, the Royal Niger Company sold its claims to the southern kingdoms to Britain, who then merged these claims with Lagos and the defeated Edo Kingdom to form the Southern Nigeria Protectorate, named for the Niger River that runs through the region. Additionally, Britain had won recognition of its claims to the Sokoto Caliphate's lands from the rest of Europe. As a result, 1900 also saw the beginning of the British conquest of the Sokoto Caliphate, ending with the destruction of the Caliphate and a British victory in 1903. These northern lands became the Northern Nigeria Protectorate. In 1914, the Northern and Southern Protectorates were unified to form the colony of Nigeria. Nigeria's origins as a union of the unrelated Muslim North and Christian South would go on to have massive ramifications for later Nigerian history, with this divide continuing to affect Nigeria today. For decades to come, Nigeria would be a British colony, with Nigerian colonial soldiers seeing action in both world wars. During the interwar period, Nigerian nationalist movements emerged, inspired by activists such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. The result was the beginning of the Nigerian struggle for independence. Although some of these independence movements were formed along ethnic separatist lines, some early leaders like Obafemi Awolowo dreamed of a united federalist Nigeria that worked for the benefit of all of the nation's ethnic groups and gave everyone a voice. After World War II, the 1950s saw the framework of a future Nigerian state established through increased autonomy for Nigeria and reforms in the colonial government. Finally, after years of struggle, on October 1st, 1960, Nigeria became an independent state and a parliamentary democracy. Nigeria later became a republic in 1963. Unfortunately, though, regional divisions soon caused instability in the young state. The new government was perceived as too favorable to northern Nigeria, leading to a military coup d'etat in 1966 executed primarily by Southerners in the Nigerian military. Following this, a counter-coup was launched by Northerners in the military that same year, which also succeeded. Following this, in May 1967, southeastern Nigeria seceded from Nigeria, citing northerner oppression of southerners. The result was the formation of a new state known as the Republic of Biafra. This secession caused the outbreak of the Nigerian Civil War, which raged from 1967 to 1970, resulting in the deaths of roughly 2 million people. The war ended in a Nigerian victory and the destruction of the Republic of Biafra. Following the Civil War, the 1970s saw Nigeria enjoy an oil boom. While this could have helped kickstart recovery efforts from the devastating Civil War, government corruption resulted in Nigerian elites pocketing most of the oil revenue, increased competition in government to seize the oil revenue money, and growing Nigerian economic dependence on oil sales. Post-war Nigeria was characterized by a series of successive military dictatorships throughout the 1970s, until the last dictator, Olusegun Obasanjo, successfully transferred power to a democratically elected civilian government in 1979. Unfortunately, this new civilian government was then overthrown in 1983 after the president, Shehu Shagari, was overthrown by the military after winning re-election. However, the new dictator, General Muhammadu Buhari, only lasted 2 years before being overthrown and replaced by yet another dictator, General Ibrahim Babangida, in 1985. Babangida ruled Nigeria with an iron fist, and during his time as dictator, government corruption rapidly metastasized, with corruption becoming deeply ingrained in Nigeria's government and civil service, persisting even to this day. Although corruption in Nigeria was bad before Babangida, during his dictatorship, corruption itself became a Nigerian institution. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, General Babangida repeatedly committed and then delayed Nigeria's return to democratic rule. Finally, after political turmoil throughout 1991 and 1992 in Nigeria, General Babangida consented to holding a presidential election on June 12, 1993. As campaigning for the election began, A Nigerian businessman named Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola, commonly referred to as MKO Abiola, quickly became the frontrunner. Mr. Abiola, renowned today as one of Nigeria's finest politicians, was a businessman of Yoruba Muslim heritage born in southern Nigeria on August 24, 1937. Coming from a family that struggled financially, Abiola began working at age 9 to help his family. By age 19, Abiola had become involved in pan-Nigerian activism, showing that his interest in politics began early in his life. After obtaining a scholarship and graduating from the University of Glasgow with a degree in accounting, Mr. Abiola returned to Nigeria and began working in the young nation's financial sector in the 1960s. Abiola's negotiation skills and strong work ethic resulted in the young man achieving great success throughout his work with communication and pharmaceutical companies in Nigeria. By the 1980s, Mr. Abiola was one of the richest men in Nigeria. It was during this decade that Mr. Abiola developed an interest in becoming president of Nigeria. Mr. Abiola was motivated by a desire to lift the people of Nigeria out of poverty and help Nigeria become a developed nation, allowing the country to reach its full potential after years of instability and dictatorships. As Nigeria's economic situation worsened throughout the 1980s, Mr. Abiola engaged in significant philanthropic efforts, constructing a Quran study center and also building many stores in Nigeria that sold books, staple foods, and other necessities to Nigerians at an affordable price. When General Babangida announced that an election would be held on June 12, 1993, Mr. Abiola knew his time had come. By the time Abiola announced a run for president in February 1993, he had amassed a surplus of goodwill from the people of Nigeria through years of working to better the nation. Abiola ran as a candidate of the Social Democratic Party, or SDP for short, a center-left political party dedicated to social justice and ending poverty in Nigeria. After two-party primaries in spring 1993, Abiola emerged as the SDP's nominee for president of Nigeria. His campaign slogan was "Farewell to Poverty," and Abiola ran on a platform of economic growth and stability. Abiola also pledged to renegotiate and carefully manage Nigeria's international debts. With the election drawing nearer, by May 1993, Abiola seemed poised to become Nigeria's first ruler after the return to democracy, as his support base cut across the traditional tribal and religious lines that had kept Nigeria divided in the past. Southerners, Northerners, Christians, and Muslims all supported his message of hope and change. Abiola's main opponent was Bashir Tofa of the center-right National Republican Convention, or NRC for short. Tofa's campaign suffered from criticism that he was too close to the military government of General Babangida, and accordingly, Abiola enjoyed a strong lead in the polls leading up to Election Day. On June 12, 1993, Nigeria's momentous election was held, and MKO Abiola emerged victorious, with the 1993 election considered wholly free and fair by both Nigerian and international observers. MKO Abiola had won 19 out of 30 Nigerian states, including his opponent's home state, and ultimately won with 8.3 million votes compared to Tofa's 11 states and 5.9 million votes. However, just when it looked like Nigeria was going to become a democratic nation once more, tragedy struck. On June 15th, a pro-military organization obtained an injunction from a corrupt judge to halt the counting of the votes. On June 18th, election workers leaked the final election results, showing that MKO Abiola had won the election freely. Rumors began to spread that the military had hoped Tofa would win the election, and that this halting of the vote counting was driven by the military's refusal to accept an Abiola presidency. On June 24, 1993, the military government of General Babangida annulled the election, sparking a crisis in Nigeria. Soon, riots broke out across the country as furious Nigerians protested the military government's halting of the democratic transition, and security forces killed roughly 100 people that June. Foreign nations, including the US and the UK, condemned Babangida's actions. Even former dictators of Nigeria came out against Babangida. Abiola was blocked from assuming the presidency, even as General Babangida himself stepped down as dictator amidst the outcry, and handed over power to a weak interim government led by politician Ernest Shonekon. Shonekon's weak government was soon toppled in yet another military coup, but not before causing massive inflation and sending Nigeria into chaos. The leader of the coup that toppled the interim government was a general named Sani Abacha, a ruthless man who had previously served as Minister of Defense under General Babangida. General Abacha seized power for himself in the military coup and became Nigeria's newest military dictator. In June 1994, 1 year after the election, the Abacha regime illegally arrested Mr. Abiola, falsely charging him with treason. Mass strikes in protest against Abiola's arrest were harshly suppressed by the Abacha regime. General Abacha then went on to rule Nigeria for most of the 1990s in what many Nigerians consider to be the worst dictatorship Nigeria ever experienced, with the Nigerian people suffering greatly under Abacha's reign of terror. General Abacha assumed absolute power over all aspects of the Nigerian state, employing North Korean trained security forces to crack down on any signs of dissent. The Abacha regime's most infamous moment came in 1995 when the regime executed the Ogoni Nine. The Ogoni Nine were members of Nigeria's Ogoni tribe who had led a non-violent environmentalist campaign to stop the destruction and pollution of their ancestral lands by the Shell Petroleum Company. General Abacha colluded with Shell to charge the Ogoni Nine, and specifically their leader, Ken Saro-Wiwa, with false murder charges. Ken Saro-Wiwa, a human rights and environmental activist, had been a thorn in the side of Nigeria's corrupt elite for some time, and, as a result, the Abacha regime's corrupt judiciary sentenced Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni Nine to death. Although the murder charges were completely false, Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni Nine were executed by the Abacha regime in 1995. Many more political opponents were also arrested by the Abacha regime, including former leaders and military figures. General Abacha also saw Nigeria's withdrawal from international efforts to halt drug trafficking, effectively turning Nigeria into a narco-state. General Abacha and his family also embezzled billions of dollars, robbing Nigeria blind. Throughout all of this, Nigeria's icon of democracy, MKO Abiola, rotted away in jail. Kept in solitary confinement with only a Bible and a Quran, Abiola refused to renounce his claim to the presidency. In 1996, his senior-most wife, Kudirat Abiola, was assassinated, most likely by the Abacha regime. On July 7, 1998, the day he was due to be released from prison, MKO Abiola, who'd fought so hard to create a better future for Nigeria, died under mysterious circumstances. Some theorize that Abiola was poisoned, whilst others think he was beaten to death. Regardless, the circumstances of his death officially remain a mystery. Personally, I have no doubt that the Nigerian government was involved, even though General Abacha himself had died shortly before Mr. Abiola, also under mysterious circumstances. After General Abacha's death, Nigeria returned to democracy in 1999, and the Nigerian Fourth Republic was born, succeeding the Third Republic, which never got the chance to exist back in 1993. Since the Nigerian return to democracy, the nation has yet to see another military ruler, and the situation is much more stable today. However, despite this improved stability and economic growth, Nigeria remains mired in corruption, not to mention still combating the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, notorious for its 2014 kidnapping of schoolgirls in Chibok. As Nigeria goes farther into the 21st century, success awaits the nation as it continues on the path to becoming a fully developed power. Although this is a promising development, it is evident that this all could have happened much sooner in Nigeria's history had it not been for the decades lost amidst sectarian violence and political instability. Today in Nigeria, MKO Abiola lives on as an enduring symbol of democracy in Nigeria, with June 12th being officially declared Democracy Day in 2018, in remembrance of the stolen election of June 12, 1993. In the end, Mr. Abiola will live on in the hearts of Nigerians, while the man who killed him and tried to kill his dream will be forgotten. However, what if history had gone differently? What if, instead of merely being a martyr for democracy, MKO Abiola had actually managed to claim his rightful place as the president of Nigeria? What if the 1993 Nigerian election was never annulled and the will of the Nigerian people had been respected? Let's find out. Our point of divergence will be June 1993. In this alternate timeline, making sure the 1993 election isn't annulled is relatively simple. What we must change is the mindset of General Ibrahim Babangida. General Babangida had annulled the election in our timeline after his loyalists successfully obtained an injunction halting the counting of the votes. Throughout 1993, Babangida had been pressuring Nigeria's legislature, the National Assembly, to recognize him as the legitimate president in the run-up to the election, which, in some aspects, had originally been planned to legitimize the Babangida dictatorship. Likewise, it is also likely that Babangida's contingency plan was to continue ruling from a military position, using Bashir Tofa as a figurehead for his regime. All of these misdeeds were driven by Babangida's lust for power. However, what we change here is Babangida's mindset as news of the election result spreads. After MKO Abiola wins Bashir Tofa's home state of Kano, General Babangida begins to realize that MKO Abiola's landslide victory has made it impossible for him to continue his rule over Nigeria. General Babangida, instead of desperately being motivated by a lust for power, instead sees the situation as advantageous. Babangida realizes that a prosperous Nigeria will allow him to garner more wealth than one in chaos. This change in mindset does not come from the kindness of the general's heart, but rather from his greedy nature. Alternatively, were he to take drastic action and annul the election, the millions of Nigerians who had voted for Abiola may rebel against his government, ending in civil war, his death, or yet another dictatorship. Regardless of his choice, Babangida will be losing power. This is what he realizes. It is simply up to him what outcome he wants to have after losing said power. With the reality of the situation in mind, General Babangida, now motivated by a desire to preserve stability and by extension his own fortune, takes drastic action on the night of June 12, 1993. General Babangida firstly orders his ally, Arthur Nzeribe, who in our timeline led the legal challenge that resulted in an injunction and a halting of the vote counting, to abandon the original plan of legally challenging the election results, much to Nzeribe's surprise. Following this, General Babangida then dismisses his defense minister, Sani Abacha, viewing the cold-blooded and vicious general as an impediment to his plans to transfer power peacefully. On June 14th, the election results are officially released, showing that MKO Abiola had won the election with 58% of the vote. That same day, General Babangida personally pays Abiola a televised visit at his mansion in Lagos to congratulate the hardworking businessman on his hard-won victory. With a change in General Babangida's mindset, the history of Nigeria has been changed forever. Following General Babangida's acknowledgement that MKO Abiola was the winner of the election, Babangida's loyalists in the military ensure the armed forces take no action to thwart this transition to democracy. On June 15, 1993, Bashir Tofa, Abiola's electoral opponent, concedes defeat to Abiola and pledges to support the new government. As Abiola's electoral victory is confirmed, Nigerians across the nation celebrate the dawning of a new era. MKO Abiola and the SDP begin forming a new cabinet in preparation for a formal transfer of power. The new cabinet includes famous names such as proposed Minister of Communications Cornelius Adebayo and Minister of Finance Bola Tinubu. As an olive branch to the Nigerian military, who were facing a drastic loss of political influence, MKO Abiola also appointed former military ruler General Olusegun Obasanjo to be his next Minister of Defense. General Obasanjo, who'd successfully led a transition to democracy in the 1970s, is viewed as a compromise candidate, forming an important go-between for President Abiola and the Nigerian military, in hopes of preventing future military coups. Furthermore, MKO Abiola, eyeing an expansion of the government, also announces two pending cabinet appointees for offices yet to be created. These two appointees are Minister of Women's Affairs Christiana Anyanwu and Minister of the Environment Ken Saro-Wiwa. On July 1, 1993, following closed-door negotiations, the National Republican Convention announces that, for the good of Nigeria, they intend to work to an extent with Abiola and the SDP, despite their political differences. On August 27, 1993, Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola is inaugurated as the 9th President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, marking the end of military rule in Nigeria and the birth of the Third Nigerian Republic. President Abiola quickly gets to work on Nigeria's most pressing issues, namely a renegotiation of the nation's debts, something which takes up the rest of the year. While President Abiola himself focuses on managing Nigeria's international debts, his cabinet gets to work clamping down on the massive corruption that had permeated every level of the government under General Babangida. Defense Minister Obasanjo oversees a purge of suspected disloyal officers throughout the Nigerian military, incentivizing their exit through the offering of generous retirement packages that help them save face whilst being removed from their positions. Doing this results in fears of yet another military coup being put at ease. On December 24th, 1993, after months of negotiations with international lenders and banks, President Abiola announces in a Christmas Eve address that he has a Christmas gift for the people of Nigeria. Abiola announced that roughly 60% of Nigeria's foreign debts had been forgiven, and another 20% of them had been renegotiated on more favorable terms. Abiola's skills, learned throughout years of work in the financial sector, were key in earning this massive victory, with those individuals and corporations who forgave debts promised hearty subsidies and lower taxes if they began to expand their businesses into Nigerian markets. Most prominently, representatives of the US and UK aided Abiola's quest to tackle Nigeria's debt, successfully arguing to many that Nigeria deserved a fresh start free from the debts accumulated under past corrupt dictators and leaders. 1994 saw an explosion of labor organizing and the rise of unions in Nigeria, now that the nation was under democratic governance and workers no longer feared being killed for organizing. On February 1st, 1994, the Social Democratic Party announced the creation of a youth wing, which quickly swelled with thousands of members as many young Nigerians were drawn to President Abiola's message of hope and prosperity. On March 15th, 1994, the National Assembly passed and President Abiola signed into law the Act to make provisions for the prohibition of violent acts in the household and home, which was a law explicitly criminalizing domestic violence at a federal level, following lobbying by several women's groups throughout 1993, seeking to capitalize on the new democratic discourses that had emerged following the election of Abiola. A major player in this movement to criminalize domestic violence was Abiola's own daughter, Hafsa Abiola, who played a large part in bringing the movement to her father's attention. Spring 1994 saw a wave of massive changes in Nigerian society as the economy began to rapidly grow following 1993's debt forgiveness. The Abiola administration increases oversight of Nigeria's energy resources, clamping down on corruption on the part of Nigerian officials and energy corporations. Minister of the Environment Ken Saro-Wiwa also takes part in these energy reforms, working to prevent the destruction and pollution of Nigeria's waterways and arable lands. In March 1994, President Abiola announced the beginning of the National Countryside Development Program, or NCDP for short, which is an initiative meant to increase resources for poor and rural communities in Nigeria, using mixed investments from both the state and the nation's wealthiest citizens. President Abiola himself commits millions of naira from his personal fortune to begin developing schools, wells, roads, and hospitals across rural Nigeria. Likewise, on March 25th, 1994, the National Assembly passed and President Abiola signed into law the Act to Empower Nigerian Youth in the Pursuit of Knowledge, a new law making the subsidizing of education in Nigeria an official government responsibility, as well as codifying uniform standards and curricula for all Nigerian schools. The rest of spring 1994 is spent implementing these new laws and reforms. On June 12, 1994, massive celebrations take place across the nation as Nigeria celebrates 1 year since the election of President Abiola, who now enjoys an approval rating of 67% nationwide. In a speech before the cheering masses in Lagos, President Abiola announced major changes to Nigeria's national identity, stating that with the aid of the National Assembly, to signify a true break from Nigeria's previous governments, the original national anthem of Nigeria, Nigeria, We Hail Thee, would be reinstated as the nation's national anthem, replacing the anthem that originally replaced it, Arise, O Compatriots. Likewise, regarding Nigeria's flag, Abiola had wished for the national flag to symbolize Nigeria rising from the ashes of the old corrupt governments, and so, with the consent of the National Assembly, the Nigerian flag would be replaced with the original design of the flag as envisioned by flag designer Taiwo Akikumi, featuring a red sun in the middle of the flag. The new national symbols are well received and quickly adopted by the people of Nigeria. 1995 opens with more reforms by the Abiola administration. President Abiola, in his New Year's Day 1995 speech, announced the implementation of a massive reform to personal security and law enforcement in Nigeria, stating that moving forward, local police would be undergoing new training to better represent the new government's values of anti corruption and absolute submission to the Constitution and rule of law. Likewise, President Abiola himself encouraged local police departments to begin holding self defense courses for the people of Nigeria, especially as conflicts across the other parts of Africa began heating up. One last provision of this new reform was the announcement of new subsidies to help modernize the Nigerian armed forces. Fall 1995 saw yet another new law passed in Nigeria, the Act to Enshrine the Equal Rights and Dignity of Nigerians with Disabilities, a law banning discrimination against Nigerians with disabilities and expanding the construction of buildings and architecture accessible to those in wheelchairs. 1996 saw the rollout of a robust new campaign by President Abiola and the Social Democratic Party entitled I Am a Nigerian, I Am a Social Democrat, aiming to combine the act of identifying one's nationality with the nation's new governing principles. Likewise, an unspoken part of the campaign is to encourage Nigerians to register as official party members of the SDP. 1997 is on the horizon, and with it, an election scheduled for June 12, 1997, as Abiola's first term of 4 years is almost up. With this in mind, the National Republican Convention announces in June of 1996 their intent to halt cooperation with President Abiola and the SDP regarding his ambitious program of national transformation and rejuvenation. With his reforms mainly already having begun implementation, and the NRC refusing to work with him on anything unrelated to the basic functioning of the Nigerian government, President Abiola spends the rest of 1996 visiting various nations while promoting Nigeria's business-friendly climate, as well as campaigning across the nation for re-election. The NRC primary race for the 1997 election began in the fall of 1996 and saw what was presumed to be a two-way race between Ernest Shonekan and Bashir Tofa, who'd hoped for a rematch against Abiola, upended by the entrance of a celebrity candidate. Famed Nigerian musician Fela Kuti, who had been in an odious dispute with President Abiola regarding a record label contract dating back to Abiola's time in the financial sector, announces his intention to run as a candidate for the NRC nomination. Although party elites didn't take Kuti seriously, Kuti quickly emerged as the frontrunner of the NRC primary, eventually beating out Shonekon and Tofa to seize the NRC nomination in March 1997, shocking many party elites. Even though Kuti stood no chance of beating Abiola, he still polled garnering 30% of the vote, far better than the other NRC candidates. Unfortunately, when campaign season was at its height in May 1997, Kuti fell ill with pneumocystis pneumonia and canceled the majority of his campaign appearances, resulting in President Abiola winning re-election by a landslide, with 81% of the vote. On August 27, 1997, President Abiola was sworn in as president for his second and last term. At the presidential inauguration, a poem is read aloud by Nigeria's beloved poet laureate, Chinua Achebe, who had been appointed to the position by President Abiola in 1993. Achebe reads aloud a poem entitled Farewell to Poverty, Nigeria, dedicated to the hard-working president and his honorable government. Farewell to Poverty, Nigeria later goes on to become one of the most seminal poems in Nigerian literary history, widely studied and discussed in schools and universities for generations to come. Abiola's second term is mainly dedicated to cementing the success of the various initiatives and campaigns launched during his first term. One major new initiative of Abiola's second term is a drastic expansion of the Nigerian government's HIV/AIDS prevention efforts. The HIV/AIDS prevention efforts, nicknamed Abiola Against AIDS by the Nigerian public, are a large success, resulting in only 3 million Nigerians being HIV positive by the mid-2000s, compared to 7 million in our timeline. Crucially, another facet of our world changed by Abiola's successful presidency is the absence of Nigerian prince scams. Because the nation was enjoying a steadily improving economy, scams never gained prominence amongst the people of Nigeria. By the year 2000, this alternate, prosperous Nigeria is completely unrecognizable to the Nigeria of our timeline. After 7 years in power, President Abiola was not only able to launch his various reforms and initiatives, but also cement them within the fabric of Nigeria's society and government. Corruption and poverty are at an all-time low, with Nigeria scheduled to repay its remaining foreign debts ahead of schedule. the SDP cruises to a supermajority in the 1999 legislative elections, resulting in the disbandment of the National Republican Convention amidst its split into smaller parties ranging from center-right to far-right. On March 1, 2000, President Abiola, in a speech at the University of Lagos, is joined on stage by the Nigerian Minister of the Environment, Ken Saro-Wiwa. President Abiola, limited to only 2 terms, introduces Saro-Wiwa to the audience as, quote, the next president of Nigeria. Minister Saro-Wiwa, fresh off a win in court against Shell Petroleum Company regarding their pollution of the Niger Delta, announces that he will be running for president in the 2001 election as a candidate of the SDP, which is met with much fanfare and excitement across Nigeria. The rest of the 2000 news cycle in Nigeria is dominated by the whirlwind presidential campaign of the tremendously popular Saro-Wiwa, along with his pick for vice president, famed Nigerian writer Wole Soyinka. On March 1, 2001, Ken Saro-Wiwa secures the SDP party nomination, going on to win the 2001 election in a landslide against the opposition, who were unable to band together in a coalition, resulting in multiple right-wing candidates siphoning off votes from each other. President Saro-Wiwa, after his inauguration as Nigeria's 10th president on August 27, 2001, went on to be a successful leader for Nigeria in his own right, overseeing the strengthening of environmental protections and anti-desertification campaigns across the nation as the climate crisis worsens. In 2005, after the completion of a successful project to overhaul Nigeria's power grids, ensuring that even the most rural areas have access to electricity, President Saro-Wiwa cruises to re-election. His second term oversees the implementation of government subsidies to Nigerian artists and filmmakers, resulting in a booming Nigerian cinema industry later on in the 2010s. On July 7, 2008, Nigeria's greatest president, Moshood Kashimawo Olawale Abiola, passes away peacefully in his sleep at his mansion in Lagos, resulting in 3 weeks of mourning and a funeral attended by heads of state from across Africa and the world. Nigeria, it was said, had lost one of the greats. In 2009, another election was held in Nigeria, pitting the ruling SDP, which had dominated the Nigerian government for the past 16 years, against the Nigerian Nationalist Party, a far-right electoral coalition composed of traditionalists and former military officers. The Nigerian Nationalist Party candidate, the mercurial and aggressive Sani Abacha, runs on a platform of a return to what he calls traditional values and governance. While there are fears that Abacha's populist rhetoric may gain traction amongst the older generation, the SDP's worries are assuaged when Sani Ofehe, a 37-year-old Nigerian human rights activist, emerges as the frontrunner for the primaries, which he ends up winning. In the general election of June 12, 2009, Ofehe defeats Abacha in the closest election yet for the SDP, with Ofehe garnering 56% of the vote to Abacha's 44%. Although Abacha refuses to concede defeat, his futile attempts to challenge the election's outcome collapse after Abacha meets his demise following his goading of an old military friend to shoot a black velvet tamarind off of his head following the consumption of copious amounts of ogogoro palm wine at a nightclub in Lagos on June 14, 2009. On August 27, 2009, Sani Ofehe was inaugurated as Nigeria's 11th president. President Ofehe's 2 terms in office are best remembered by the crisis that rocked Nigeria while he was in power. On April 15, 2014, Boko Haram, an Islamic terrorist group in the far north of Nigeria, launches an offensive to establish an Islamic State in northeastern Nigeria, beginning with an attack on the prosperous city of Chibok. Thankfully, as a result of President Abiola's past security reforms, the city's police can defend the residents of Chibok until the Nigerian armed forces arrive to crush the rebellion. Accordingly, the military then launches a massive campaign overseen by the Military High Command and Nigerian intelligence agencies to root out and destroy Boko Haram's armed groups and secretive cells across northeastern Nigeria throughout 2014, with President Ofehe declaring victory over the group following a decapitation strike that kills Boko Haram's leadership in July of 2014. Following another breakdown of the Nigerian Nationalist Party into various splinter groups, much as what had happened to the NRC years before, the 2017 Nigerian presidential election looks to be an easy win for whichever candidate the SDP nominates. Although at first, the primary race looks to be tight as many party elites and elder statesmen throw their hats into the ring, The party primaries are completely shaken up by the entry of a beloved SDB politician, Hafsa Abiola, the daughter of former President MKO Abiola. As a result of her long resume working under her father and the power the Abiola name carries in this alternate timeline's Nigeria, Hafsa Abiola is able to obtain the SDP nomination, going on to win the 2017 election essentially unopposed. On August 27, 2017, Hafsa Abiola is inaugurated as the 12th president of Nigeria and the nation's first female president. In her inauguration speech, the younger President Abiola expresses her wish that her father were here to witness this historic day, but states that, regardless, she knows that today he is watching over all Nigerians with pride. Over the past 24 years, Nigeria had said farewell to poverty, corruption, and strife. Nigeria had finally obtained a government worthy of serving its people. Although the future was never certain, Nigerians of all ethnicities and from all walks of life walked into the future certain that they could count on their government to always fight for them and their interests. MKO Abiola's vision for Nigeria had finally been realized.